And good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Dearborn Board of Education, School District of the City of Dearborn. Today we do have board study session. It's Monday, May 5th, 2025, and it is 6:06 p.m. I call this meeting to order. Roll call, please.
Trustee Aljahmi. Here. Trustee Barry.
Here.
Trustee D'Ambrosio.
Here.
Trustee Petlicoff.
Here.
Vice Chair Watts.
Here.
Trustee Czar here. Chair Moseb.
Here.
Next is the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag, and President Moseb will lead the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Next item.
Next item is citizen participation. Citizens wishing to address the board on agenda and non-agenda items for action who are signed in by 6:10 p.m. by submitting a blue card to the board secretary may speak at this time. The board may not be in a position to respond to non-agenda items. Therefore, speakers should not anticipate an immediate response to their comments and questions. For the benefit of all concerned, do not mention the names of students or school district employees. Please keep your comments as brief as possible. There is a 3-minute time limit on comments made to the board. Just one. We just have one card. Ian Tomashik, did I say that right? Did I say that right? Yeah. Okay. Ian Tomashik here to speak to preservation and reuse of historic school meetings.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. Again, my name is Ian Tomashik. I'm a lifelong Dearborn resident, born and raised in Dearborn schools, Hague, Bryant, and Dearborn High. So I know firsthand that our schools need upgrades. Of course, technology as well as, at the very least, air conditioning. However, one of the things that I learned in Dearborn schools was to take pride in your community, take pride in the school that you go to, and I feel it would be big mistake to not look at adaptively reusing some of Dearborn's older public schools rather than tearing down and replacing them as these needs become more apparent. Really happy to see you guys having a presentation here by Quinn Evans. I'm actually a historic preservationist with the city of Detroit, as well as I currently run Preservation Dearborn, a nonprofit aimed at promoting understanding of historic buildings in and around Dearborn. Some of our oldest schools, particularly our 1920 schools, contain stonework that can never be reproduced. Some of them, including Lindbergh, Whitmore Holes, and the old Dearborn High, were designed by Dearborn architects, including C. Vickers. Is that? Oh. So as a preservationist, but also as a Dearborn resident, I appreciate the stewardship with which our historic residents, updated and worked on our schools so that they continue being beautiful beacons of our neighborhood, as well as places where parents can send their kids and grandparents can send their grandkids and say, wow, I went to the same school. Look at, our enduring presence here in the city of Dearborn. I don't think there's anything better than a legacy of sending your kids and grandkids to the same place, living in the same neighborhood where you grew up and where you've lived your entire life. I know I certainly plan to send my kids to Dearborn Public Schools as soon as I have them, and would be very excited about them, attending the same schools that me and my friends did as children, as well as having these beautiful schools not only be updated so that they continue serving our students in the best way possible, but also to preserve some of their beautiful qualities, their architectural qualities that can never be regained once they are gone. So again, I commend the board's interest in hearing Quinn Evans give a presentation about adaptively reusing Dearborn's older schools, whether that be as a continue to be used as a school or to have this building, to welcome all, alternative uses to these buildings, such as apartments, which, Dearborn has a shortage of housing, would be great. I also would like to point out, as I'm sure they will, that historic buildings, reusing historic buildings is the most environmentally sustainable option of any kind of construction. It was actually one of their own, Carl Elefante, who said the greenest building is the one that's already built. Historic buildings have embodied carbon that we can never regain once they are torn down and brought back. And I know it aligns with not only the mayor's goals, but also the country's goals to become a more sustainable society. So again, I thank the board for their consideration. And,
Thank you for addressing us. We truly appreciate your comments.
Yes, have a good night.
Thank you.
Dr. Maleko, we do have a presentation by our firm if you want to give an introduction.
Yeah, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Wall and Mr. Mustin, who are taking the lead for the district, and they will introduce, after they frame the conversation for tonight.
You want me to do it? You gonna do it?
All right. We're going to kind of follow what we presented to the board in January. We had like 5 or 6 slides talking about where we're at in the infrastructure back in January. Do you want me to go through all that, or do you want me to, I think it might be good just to kind of reset the schedule or the table. So after our bond issue in 2019, we had a post-election debrief. We interviewed outside consultants, and a professional survey of the community was done based upon the 2019 results. In November, December of 21, Citizens Committee was finalized, and citizens began to meet with our representatives and look at the future bond. In March of 2022, the Citizens Committee presented to the board that a bond issue was needed, but a lot of questions on what should be included in that bond. In April of 2022, the board discussion of facilities needs and the district requests more community input. So that's where the idea of a long-term plan on the bond was kind of formed. The district looked at hiring outside companies to present and conduct a 30-year longitudinal study of facility needs that supported instructional needs also. In May 9th of 2022, the board discussed that. In fall of 22, Fielding International was hired to do the 30-year longitude study. In May of 2023, they presented that master plan final recommendation to the board. At that point, the board felt that there were still some things missing, especially the historical aspect of that. So we went back out and looked at additional vendors to come in and look at the historical study and eventually take that information and go out to the board. In January of 25, the sought approval of our friends here that actually did the long study and kind of updated our numbers to make sure everything was present, because during that time, we had about $90 million that we did for the ESSER funds and wraparound projects where we put some air conditioning and HVAC improvements. And also at that time, we did $11.3 million bond issue on energy improvements in the district, which is wrapping up this year. So with that, I'm going to turn it over. Well, let me ask if there's any questions. All right. With that, I'll turn it over to Quinn Evans to kind of summarize what the work that they've done over the last 4 months.
Good evening. I'm just looking to see if our slides in our agenda are going to appear up there. There they go. So we'll have some quick introductions, and then we want to talk about the infrastructure update evaluation, talk about the goals, and about where we are in our process today. We're going to show an example of the report from us having looked at all of the buildings here in the district, and we picked Duval as an example so you can sort of see our process and what we've gone through on all of the buildings. We're going to give a discussion over what we consider new, major, or moderate options, descriptions, and explaining that to you so you have a baseline and an understanding of what that would mean overall, not specifically to each school, but that's the piece of where we'll be looking at each school to understand, is it best to be a new, have major renovations or moderate renovations. And then we'll talk through some of the top priorities that we've seen and heard from being in the buildings, from our conversations with some of you, conversations with principals, looking at where we're going forward.
Before you move on, can you
Yes.
please introduce your team and yourself as well. Thank you.
I will. How do I move this forward? All right, I'm Ann Delcher with Quinn Evans, and this is Denise Close with Quinn Evans as well. And we have Stephanie Corona and Amro who are here from Gilbane with us. Quinn Evans is a national firm. We have, in Michigan, we have offices in Ann Arbor and in Detroit, and we focus on a lot of areas that really are public building types. Schools and heritage projects are two of the main areas that we focus on in our work. We also do a lot of museum work and then some housing work as well. In Michigan Central Station, people have probably seen that in the news for the past year, very proud of that project. But we're also proud of the space within that project where we did the fit out for Google Code Next Detroit, which is free computer science education space for kids. So looking not only at the historic, but looking at what are the new educational type spaces that you can put within a building. Here in the community, we may be known more for our heritage practice, projects that I've worked on, such as the Glass Gallery at Greenfield Village, which is very much a new and an old together project. And then Stand 44, which is a new food venue that also has a culinary education classroom component to it, which is across from the Detroit Farmers Market we did, which is very much a historic project, rebuilding that market from Detroit. On our K-12 practice, we also have offices in Baltimore, Washington, D.C., and Richmond, Virginia. And so we've done a whole bunch of work with new and a lot of existing building renovation work across the Mid-Atlantic. This is just one example here that I give you from Arlington, Virginia, which was the first school integrated in Virginia and had a very historic, importance that way, but is an addition. And just to sort of show you the difference between what the media center looked like, and in the end that went somewhere else, and what is this flexible project-based classroom. This is a middle school that was created into that space to give you a look of what can happen and how new and fresh renovation can be. And we're here with our partners from Gilbane. We'll let them introduce themselves.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm technologically challenged today. Stephanie Corona, I'm with Gilbane Building Company. I'm with Amro here, and we both specialize in K through 12. I've been actually in the industry for well over, I'm going to say over 25 years. I'm not going to give an exact date, but for a while. Gilbane Building Company is the #1 K through 12 builder in the country. We're a national firm with an office located in Detroit. We are currently working in Michigan on several school district projects. We're here to assist in reviewing the drawings, the existing conditions of the drawings, along with Quinn Evans, but also to provide some cost modeling. So since we do so much K through 12 work in the country, we have cost models that are very accurate depending on what you're trying to do with the building. I think it was important for Amro and I to walk the buildings to have an understanding of what a renovation looks like, or a major renovation, and at what point does it make sense to potentially look at a new building. We have started looking at that with Quinn Evans, and will be reflective in a future report. So thank you.
And I'd like to add in is some of this, I think that last project I showed, we have worked with Gilbane on the Mid-Atlantic, and we are also working with them closely as their project managers for the Ann Arbor Public Schools work, of which we're working there, and we're working with them as well at Detroit Public Schools on projects there. We want to see this work clearly as adding to. We're not a brand new here. We know that there's the 30-year master plan that you've put the work and time into. We are working closely in Ann Arbor Public Schools with Fielding International, and so partnering on some schools. So we're very familiar with their model and the pedagogy and what that 21st century school is that they're bringing. And so we really bring that idea and that mindset as we look at the existing buildings for what is possible or what might not be possible in these schools. And then updating and using the demographic study in our report and those updated numbers. So Denise is going to talk a little bit more about the goals in the report that we've prepared.
Yeah, so as we were looking at all of the buildings, things that we really wanted to focus on and things that we researched, the historic context, so how it fits on the site, the importance, why it was built in the first place, talking about influx of populations. We learned some interesting things. And then the various styles and building waves that happened within the city. So we detailed that out. The building conditions, we looked at the buildings. We had a team go to all of the 34 district buildings, which includes transportation operations and the building we're in now, including all the schools, to understand how they're being used today by the staff and students. And then Gilbane team went out and looked at them from the perspective of, can the conditions mostly, and are they ripe for renovation, or are they maybe not from a constructability or structural standpoint? Also, how those buildings may or may not be easily adaptable to 21st century learning, which is the Fielding model, and then as Anne was saying, kind of variations on that theme, and what level you might take that philosophy to within an existing building. Also, we studied the site plans. So in the report, we have existing site plans for all of the properties, which also detail the year of the existing school was built, the original, let's say, and then a lot of them have multiple additions. And so we've outlined all of that. So it's very clear to see how the building was maybe added onto over time and the site constraints that exist today for each of those schools. And then, we're also looking at then costs that it would take to bring the buildings up to just a standard level of care, things that maybe are lacking today, and then those levels of renovation and what that cost might entail. So where we are now, we have a draft report of all the buildings. We detail, like I said, the historic context and those building conditions. And the adaptability for this new 21st century school learning model. We're working through this workshop and others with understanding how those site constraints and opportunities exist within all of the properties to really understand what's the best approach for each of the buildings. And so we're looking at that with all these other layers of information so that we can help strategize what is the right fit for each of the schools. We're looking at projected enrollment numbers that you've seen in addition to all the other data that was provided to us that you've already done the work for. And then we're bringing in the cost factor so that you have a realistic budget and a realistic ask as we're working with the group that's helping put together the bond package. This is an example from our report. So this is Duval Elementary. So we start out with some data facts, when the school was originally built, the site area, things like that, the enrollment and the projected enrollment.
And I would say it's that projected enrollment number that's key as we look at the 21st century school idea, where we have a good sense of, say, a student number per square foot that we use in calculating, say, a new 21st century elementary school. We know that takes about 150 square feet a student to achieve that in a new school. So we can start to understand the schools that today may be undersized or oversized, and what's the appropriate approach.
Each school or each building has a historical context section. So this is where, again, we look at maybe why the building was built in the first place. We know there was some of the early buildings here were built because of all of the workers at the Ford plant coming in, and so then Henry Ford was building schools for those families. And so that is part of this historic context. And also just the architectural features themselves. So we just want to list that out equally across the board for the buildings from the 20s, the 50s, and as well as the 90s schools, so that it's all there to understand. This is an example of the site plan, and Duval obviously has had multiple additions over time. So the original building in white there, and then, added on in the front and the sides and filled in the middle. And it really shows that this is, obviously a landlocked property, not a lot of room for expansion, not a lot of room for parking and playgrounds. But I think it's a clear, again, we have this across the board for all of the buildings, and I think it's a clear indication of kind of what's happening on each of the sites. And then within each of the buildings, there is a breakdown of exterior features and interior features that we looked at and wrote about, just our observations of what's happening. So things like, is there a secure entry? Some of the schools, yes. Many of them, no. Just the building conditions themselves. How is it being used? Is there circulation issues? What are the playgrounds like? Do the schools need more playgrounds? Are there extras? Parking, things like that. And then on the interior, we have a section talking about, a lot of those similar items as they apply to the inside of the school, but also like support spaces, and are the classrooms right sized for the use, how they're being used today. Cafeteria and kitchen was another one, and then gymnasiums and pools was another piece that we specifically looked to.
So that's an overview of the report structure that we've done for all of the buildings in some detail with photographs, just to understand where they are and benchmark them compared to things we would expect in a school today. And so the next step as we go through this is putting price and recommendations on each, talking about, is this best for a new building on the site, major renovation or expansion, or just what we are calling a renovation. That renovation might include some expansion. Some of these major renovation and expansions might include taking something off and putting something back on, as we look at how it best fits the site and works on that. So I just wanted to introduce these three topics with a little bit of information on them. So some examples that we've been working on. This is a Lawton Elementary School in Ann Arbor, and what you see in the green is the existing building that was built in the 60s on there, and this is a site where they're looking to put a new school on and then demolish the existing school. When we're looking at new, it's always a question of where is their property. We really want at least 7 acres. This site doesn't have that, but to be able to do that swap, keeping students on site and safely constructing a new school so that those students, we don't have to find a staging location for students to go off and stage somewhere else. Ann Arbor's doing a combination of both of these, building some on and then moving the kids over and demolishing, and staging students some places as they look at which buildings are new. And then they're doing several major modification projects as well. So this goes back to the Fielding International model of a 21st century school. These are showing you what they look at and what we talk about in terms of, if you're doing a new school, what does that learning environment look like? And here what we're looking at is a pod, or a flexible learning unit. For example, on the right side for the 2nd grade, there's 4 classrooms that are combined around one commons area and mudroom area, and the classroom, and a couple of small group rooms with that. So there's connections between the classrooms. If they want to open and teach that way, there's connections between some of the classrooms and that open commons area. That open commons area is thought that if you're having a whole class presentation for all the 5th graders, this is a bigger school with 4 sections of each grade, but it starts to give you that that sense and that idea of how a new school might get laid out. This is an example when we start talking about major renovation. Are there ways that we take that major renovation and make it work within an existing school? And these are floor plans from Slauson Middle School that we're working on in Ann Arbor as well. And so at the top, it's showing what the layout is today, very typical in these buildings. This wing is from the 50s, the original part of the school is from the 20s, but a double-loaded corridor, classrooms on each side, windows if they haven't been infilled. In this major renovation, it's taking that idea of the classrooms and the commons for a grade level, and so we are getting the red line shows where the corridor is now, and the red line on the bottom is showing where the corridor was historically. So you can see we're pushing classrooms out and we're taking away that double-loaded corridor and making classrooms deeper so that we have space for a commons and for new bathrooms and for the lockers. So this really shows how we can take an existing building and make the inside of it very new to fit that model. Places this is appropriate, places the new school is appropriate. Here's some, just some photos. This building project's going into construction. So on the left are the photos of the conditions today, and on the right are the renderings of what we're going to look at. This is a middle school that actually has more square footage than you would need, and so we are removing additions that were made in the 50s to the 1920s facade of this. So that's sort of the change that you would see on the front of the school coming back to what it was. This is an example, was Kramer Junior High, Kramer Middle School in Washington, D.C. Some of this was more major renovation, some of it's more modern. I like the photos on the bottom too, as a before and after, to show that how you can really change the character and the feel of a school with looking at the ceilings and the finishes and the lighting to make a big difference, a big impact without building a new school. And then a third example here, it starts to get into that discussion of major versus moderate renovation. This is an elementary school where there was an addition put on. The top is the original school. On the bottom shows there was an addition, not a huge addition, but an addition really to address entry. Entry and security is something we see, and we do a lot of work to address that. And the photo on the left is showing the case of a more moderate. We kept the double-loaded corridor model of this, not as much cost, but we could open up a classroom. So what you're seeing to the left is where we've opened up what was a classroom to become one of those commons areas and meeting areas and bringing in the light. So just another example of how to start to think about these existing schools and what they can be. And that's one I noted we worked on with Gilbane in Washington, D.C. Here are two floor plans that are looking back at that same school and sort of identifying some of those nodes of space. So it's keeping that double-loaded corridor, but it's looking at where are you making subtle changes between those to open up, to give the small group rooms, to give a little more of that collaboration space, and to give really a refresh on that interior to make it feel like a new school as well. And these are all three models that are appropriate in different levels to the school buildings that you have, and that's the piece where we are sorting that out right now. We did talk to a lot of people, and these are the key priorities that we heard coming as we went through the schools that I'll let Denise.
Yeah, so in conversations with the administration team that we were working with, Tom, David, and Mark, in addition, we met with quite a few principals. They were given the opportunity to sign up and talk with us, and we had multiple meetings with principals. We had a meeting with the operations staff, Every time our team went out to the buildings, they met with the building engineers, so we got some feedback from them. We did meet with 3 people on the board here tonight from the facilities committee, and then we've also met with superintendent. So combination of those conversations, the key priorities that came out, there were a lot of themes that were similar. Safety and security, restrooms, student support spaces, infrastructure, meaning, lighting, air conditioning, heating and cooling, and then the site, so places to play, enough parking, and safe circulation. Those were themes that kind of carried throughout all of our conversations. So this is another example, just wanted to share, of adding on a secure vestibule. So existing building at the top, the school was lacking any sort of, that locked vestibule situation. And so this was an addition that was put on that really made the entry welcoming and safe. This is a view from the inside, so you have the series of locked doors and glass viewing area. So that's one way to handle it with an addition for buildings. And then we have an example, this is against Lawson Middle School, where we're not putting an addition on the historic entry, but we are able to reconfigure the inside on the left as the existing, where you just walk in a series of doors and then you're just open into the corridor. And we've added, that back vestibule wall and locked that off and moved the administration just next to the vestibule now. And so now we have created that secure vestibule with the locked areas, the pass-through for IDs and whatnot. And so it's possible to do that in multiple ways to get that same result. Okay, next, another one of the main things we heard about was restrooms and the privacy component of that. And so it's one thing that we're putting in all of our schools now are floor to ceiling stalls. So there is, sound privacy, there's single user restroom options for anyone that wants to use them. Staff is very appreciative to have that everywhere. Students are appreciating that. And it is required for the lower grades to have restrooms in their classrooms, and we want to make sure that they're accessible, and so that they're large enough. Often the younger schools or the older schools do have restrooms, but they're not large enough, and so needing to create more space to make them usable for all. This is another example of just some restrooms, and maybe they're individual stalls. And then there's a shared sink area, and we're seeing that model more often. Another area that we heard a lot about was support spaces. So when a lot of the schools, unless your school is fairly new, even the 90s schools really weren't considering all of these extra support spaces that we need today. So things like counseling and social work, psychology, speech, all of those private meetings that want to be had, there's really no space dedicated for them, or it wasn't considered when the building was constructed.
We saw a lot of creative hacks. I mean, your people are working hard to make it work and serve the students really well with what they have today.
So yeah, these are some examples from your schools. But we know that there are ways that we can either design new or we can modify existing spaces to create the privacy and the security that's needed for these conversations. And so this is an example where we've taken a classroom and put 4 offices and a waiting room in there. And so there is a space where parents can wait before their meeting is called. They can shut the door and go in and have a private session. And so again, there are multiple ways to resolve this in a new building or an existing.
So that's an overview of what we've heard and what we've been up to and what we're processing. Really where we are in the process is coming to you as our draft report is being put together so that we can hear and answer questions from you all and hear more in terms of priorities. And we figured the questions that you have are questions someone looking at our report will have. So we want to integrate that into our discussion and work then coordinating those recommendations again with the research project that's going forward with Byram and Fisk and with your leadership.
I'll open the floor to any questions to the team first. Thank you so much for the report and the presentation. We truly appreciate it. Thank you for meeting with all of representatives from staff and the administration and us board members. So questions, Trustee Petlicoff?
Yeah, you know I'm going to be first, since I'm the one who asked for this. We know that last time we had difficulty in fully communicating our visions and our plans when we went out for a bond previously, and people didn't quite understand what we were planning on doing, or it was misinterpreted. With all this information, while we are comfortable with digesting it, it's very hard to get out to the community and be able to have them understand what their options are. Usually we find that the majority of people just want to get down to the nuts and bolts. What are you going to do and how much is it going to cost me? I want to make sure that we have the most successful opportunity to get the information out there in a way that people can understand it and understand what their choices are. I want to make sure that they understand the degree in depth. As you talked about Ann Arbor, they passed $1 billion bond in 2019. They are just now putting shovels in the ground, apparently, for the most part, to start their school projects. Many of them, their children will never see the inside of that building. So I want to make sure that we understand the scope and can communicate it well, whatever the community wants to fund, so that they know what the difference will be between a major renovation versus a new building versus, and what that's going to entail and how it's going to impact each neighborhood. Because every time you disrupt a neighborhood school building, you're disrupting the students, where they go to school, for how long, and when they're going to revisit that neighborhood, what kind of disruption it will cause. All of those kinds of questions that people don't think about in the moment, because all they want to know is, what are you going to do and how much is it going to cost me? So how do you think that you could help present this story to people so that they would understand? And I know we've hired somebody to do that actual conversation, but your information is going to have to be put in a format that can be communicated to the general population as well.
And as we're working through that, one way that we're doing that, for example, Denise showed the site plan that's of the existing site plan that starts to communicate. There's a faster way to get, starts to communicate the buildings on the site, the dates that things happen to that. One way to communicate that is for us to be looking at these site plans, to be giving a sense, not in architectural detail, but what we see in terms of recommendations, in terms of happening on the site. Is there a new building that fits on the site? Is there an addition of about a certain size? Is there something that's coming off the site? But to give a general idea for each project. We do know it's not until we get really into that building to understand the specifics of what's needed in terms of more analysis, but to understand in general what's happening, and then to have the overall dollars so that we understand overall the scope can be covered at all the buildings for that single dollar sum, which is similar to, you could speak to.
It
your
is
space
for
in Ann Arbor.
for Ann Arbor. They had all the same. Almost every district has the same priorities. There, almost every building did not have any air conditioning, so they were battling many of their historic buildings, reaching 90 degrees at times, in the middle of the school year. So the priority there for the first 4 years was to make sure some type of air conditioning got into every one of the buildings while they were planning and getting ready for their major renovations and additions. So actually, 98% of the buildings right now now have air conditioning, which they never had before. So that was the first 4 years. That's what they decided to do in order for every student to feel the impact of it immediately, and get the advantage and not have to wait. Then there's a phase 2 which is now addressing the programming needs and the major renovations that need to occur. So it was a two-phase process there. That may be the case here in some cases. I think that's why we're going through this. We have to see where you've been, where you're currently at, and then from there, some educated decisions can be made of how to move forward. And what we're going to look to provide is, what are your options? And so you're going to have options. It's not going to be a one-size-fits-all. Every school is built at a different time. Every school has different needs. And what we see on the outside, once we get on the inside and we really start looking at it, and that's what Amaro and I did, is we got into the belly of the school to see, is it even feasible? Does it make sense? There were some additions put on during the years of the 60s and 70s that aren't the same quality and craftsmanship that happened in the 20s and 30s and even 40s. And I think we all know that. And our newer buildings are fortunate to have air conditioning and a lot of amenities that the older buildings don't have. And that's where this team is coming in to see how do we bring them all to the same level.
And you feel confident that you can put together a message that would be simplified enough that it can be communicated across the district for everybody who's at a different level of information that they want to digest?
So our plan is, to have the options for the district and for Byram and Fisk and for the workshopping, but the options would not go out to the public. They would have been decided, and so there would be a plan at that point, and so
That be presented
right.
for discussion to the
Right,
public.
so, we are looking forward to working with Byram and Fisk too, to share our information so that they have that as their kind of.
So that they
their-
can test those options and
Okay.
talk to the
Yeah.
community about those options. They're not decided before they go forward, but we're creating options for discussion so the community can have that input on the options they feel fit their community the best. And then it's coming back with the communications package. And what we've prepared really is for those people who want to dig in and understand on top of the
basics.
the base
yeah.
look.
Yeah, because one of our priorities was we didn't want them to come forward with a recommendation.
Right.
That wasn't the goal. The goal was to make sure they had all the data, what could happen, the cost entailed.
Right.
That way, they've already been working with Byron and Fisk to be able to gather the information so they can now test and go out and do surveys, focus groups, to see how people feel about where our building's at and where they want to go. So what's the same for one building might not be for another, based on that community responses. So the goal was not to come up with a recommendation, because we don't want the public to feel that we've already
That
made a
we
decision.
directed them, right.
This is just, all right, if they look at Duval, well, obviously, we want another, if they want a new building, Duval's not the site to do it with the kids there. So that's not an option that they could do. If they just want an addition, like a bigger auditorium or gym, that's something we would have looked at to see if it fits. So they've kind of answered some of those questions, and now it's for Byram and Fisk to take that data, go out to the public and saying, all right, are you looking at just several different layers, and Dave can go into the more layers. At a broad level, do you like new or renovations? That'd be a broad question at this point to start the community input, and then to kind of find detail more as the options come through. And they'll say that, for example, if renovations is, 80% they do renovations, only 20 new, then they can start defining some of those things for a recommendation to come back to the board. Yeah, the last thing we want to do is pre-design this whole process and go out to the board. We're not at that level yet. Because we want to make sure what we're going to offer, to the community is something the community wants. And that then entails that if they want this project, then how much is that going to cost? And so then we can start talking about, once you say, all right, this is the feedback we're getting back to this kind of a project, then we can say, well, on this project, we work with our financial consultants and say, this is going to be this much of a cost to an average homeowner. So we're not there yet. We're still at the broad level, and we got to take this data and then start digging down and see where the community wants to go with it. So, and Byron and Fisk are experts at that. None of us here at the table are, and they're the ones that will be working with, them, Quinn Evans, and administration, and kind of start developing where that's gonna go. Without a quick process.
No, I know.
Trustee Zahar?
Can you go back to the slide that had the key priorities, or can you try to find that
Yes.
slide? So thank you for everything that you guys are doing. I know when I sat down, one of the key priorities that I talked about, which doesn't seem like it's up here, I spent most of my meeting talking about it, was what makes Dearborn schools special, I think, and unique from a lot of other cities is our neighborhood schools and maintaining our neighborhood schools. You know, that means not finding a big empty field somewhere in Dearborn and saying, hey, let's go put our school over there. Keeping our schools in our neighborhoods. I know it's a challenge. I know that the space might be scarce, but to me, that's what makes our community sort of special, is these schools in the neighborhoods where maybe in an elementary school a lot of the students are walking with their parents to school on a nice day or whatever it might be. It's what keeps people interested in living in our city. It's what keeps some of the real estate prices respectable and high. So I would like to see that added as you guys are looking at all the different ideas here, is how do we maintain that neighborhood feel of our schools? Another thing that's come up since then is, and this might be, lower on the list of things you look at, but still, is pickups and drop-offs. We have a lot of parents and residents complaining about, it's just a disaster when there's pickups and drops off sometimes. So maybe weaving a plan for that into the new ideas that you're putting forward. But most importantly, this idea of neighborhood schools. I didn't see that up there, and to me, that should be like near the top.
And I think our list is the priorities of things that need fixing. So yes, I agree that it is a priority, and the ones on the list here are
So
more
this is
so.
just the
This
things
is
that need
more the
fixing?
things that
Well,
need.
okay, fine, but
But I
don't
agree
Yes,
want to
the-
fix to
the
it and be
goal
that it
to
ends up in a
keep.
field somewhere. Yeah.
No,
Right,
no,
it's,
you're right.
it's important on what are the important things we often work on with people to talk about, toss, keep, and create, right? And this is the what we need to create within our schools and what we need to keep agreed, that list of what is the importance to get that reflected.
And I think the challenges for new schools is property. I mean, that's going to be the number one challenge that we saw at a lot of pieces of property that you have. You have a lot that are landlocked. Realistically, there isn't a lot of property sitting around Dearborn. So, and we're looking at that when we look at the options that are available. So there'll be some options that we're going to say it's not an option. There isn't an option to put a new school on an existing spot because there's no place to put it. And so when we talk about the options, it's the feasible options. You could always have an option to try to find property and move the school out of the neighborhood, but we also heard very plain and clear from every school we went to that was part of the culture of that school, is that it was a neighborhood school.
And also in light of, can I ask a follow-up question?
Go ahead.
In light of what our friend Ian expressed in the beginning, I think it would be useful for us, and maybe this is what you're planning to do anyway, to say, look, in a historic school, let's say, like, I don't want to name a school, but just a historic school that might have a lot of issues, to say, look, this is what it would cost to, like, keep the historic feel of the school and do everything we need to do. This is what it would cost to put it in the football field. This is what it would cost to move it out of the neighborhood, whatever. I mean, just so that we see all these different things, because, who knows? Maybe we might think, hey, okay, it might cost a little bit more, but to keep the historic feel of the school, it all depends on what those numbers are. So I think it's important for us to see those different options as well. Because I can see it being a lot easier to sell a bond to the community that says, look, we could have moved all these schools out of the neighborhoods and spent less money, but we need to spend a little bit more money to keep the feel and keep the neighborhood, you know what I mean? So, I mean, it's important for us to see those different options as well. Thanks.
Trustee Al-Jahmi?
I'll start off with a question to the board and the staff. So we said we did, and I apologize because I'm new, so I'm trying to get what Fields and did for us in 2022. they did an assessment for us, and we did not go with them because they did not include historical. And I'm just trying to, from my knowledge, if
It was
somebody could
two
speak.
aspects. One, the historical wasn't defined enough for the board to look at the historical versus new. And the second item is that we did $90 million in construction. And even when we went out in 2019, people were questioning the detail and what was the plan going forward. Because that 240 million we did in 2019 was just renovating and not looking forward beyond that. And so they wanted to have a longer-term plan to say what would it really cost long-term for us to bring the buildings up to the level that we expected.
So it was also a shorter term bond.
In 2019, yes.
Okay, so it was 244 million?
Was it 240, right?
245 million.
What, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, what do we anticipate the new bond to be?
All depends on.
Well, it all depends on the options. And again, it's like neighborhood schools. Are we gonna build second levels on some elementaries for the upper grades so we can keep the same footprint? Those are the things we haven't really decided yet because obviously renovation and new costs are different aspects that they put dollar values to. And so they're looking at a very creative way to be able to take different options in their cost model and decome to see what the total price is.
Okay,